manifest your epic life with Dr. Aixa Goodrich. Feel better. Function at optimal levels. Get rid of limiting beliefs and start manifesting your epic life. Here's your host, Dr. Aixa Goodrich.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Manifest Your Epic Life. As you know, my mission in life is to educate and empower the community to make better health and life choices, get rid of limiting beliefs so that you can create success and balance in all areas of your life. I'm very excited about my guest today. His name is Matt Powell. He's an author, he's a speaker, and he's an innovator in the martial arts and fitness industry. So welcome, Matt. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. I know it looks like I have a gigantic head, but I don't have a gigantic head, so I am doing wonderful.
Your head looks perfectly fine to me. In fact, I can't wait to pick at your brain here a little bit.
Okay.
So, Matt, I want you to introduce yourself to the audience and tell them a little bit about you and your journey, and then we're going to get into your book, which I love the title, Undo.
So I have been in the martial art community for about 20 years now. About, I guess, 15 years ago, I started going back and forth to Russia to one of the original schools that they have for scientific learning for martial art. Then I would come to the U.S. and I would teach, and then I would go back and forth. And then one day, it was a very scientific system. It wasn't what you see in the movies where they're just kind of, doing a bunch of techniques. We were studying mechanics and physics and psychology. It was very broken down scientifically. And so we had our group in the U.S. and we decided, you know what, we're going to kind of go in our own direction. And so we cut ties, and then a year or two later, I was the only one still doing it full time. We were just in a garage. And we built it up over the past decade to be an international organization. And we have 4 books that I've published. 3 of them are on learning, and now a lot of different martial arts schools and systems and programs across the world have picked up these books and started using them as their learning methodology for teaching. And, at this point, I guess we've got 200 videos on YouTube, 24 for sale videos. I've personally taught thousands in person at seminars. So kind of been all over the world doing that. And at the same time, I had a full-time job. So I was also, everybody thought that I had a part-time job or that I was just doing it full-time. I was actually working I was doing that full-time. And I was actually working in corporate security full-time. And so I was working my way up the corporate ladder, in different companies and all the way up to boardrooms, billion-dollar companies and doing consulting. And one day I said, I've got all this knowledge over here about the way that people learn from teaching thousands of people, teaching them incorrectly and correctly, and then working with some PhDs, we developed this learning system and teaching system. And I've got all this experience over here of watching people in their personal lives and their business lives have difficulties. So maybe I can tie these systems together and start to create something new. And that's where I am now.
Cool. So tell us a little bit about the system.
So PROMEC is what we called it. And it's a scientific system of studying combatives and self-defense and movement. I don't want to get too far deep down into it because people tend to go to sleep. So what we ended up having to do is that we started looking at it instead of technical sides of it. This is the technique that you do, and you're going to do this technique. We instead focused on how do we study the physics and mechanics behind the way people are moving and what they're doing, and then take those physics and mechanics and combine it with the physics and mechanics of what happens between 2 machines, because that's what we really are. Mm-hmm. And so, when you have 2 machines working together, once we did that, we started finding, okay, people are learning really, really fast because we've simplified the learning method. But on the other hand, we've got so much information running around, we have to change this a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I started looking at ways that they were starting to teach children in schools. They were going for the different type of teaching methodology and using perceptual teaching, which is slightly different because you're trying to teach them the kind of concept of what they're learning, not what they're learning, if that makes sense. Okay. So instead of teaching them, here's history, and we're going to look at it on a linear timeline, and you have this date, this date, this date, this date. They start teaching them kind of concept of all of these things interrelated and how it's kind of a living system between these dates that events have happened and how they all kind of connect.
Okay.
And so we decided to do that with martial art. And so we backed up and we said, okay, how do people learn? Once you're in your 20s, you don't have new neurons, you have neural pathways. So what do we do with the existing neural pathways that are there? And I partnered up with a guy named Dr. John Landry, who had his PhD in adult learning, and a couple of psychologists out of Atlanta. And we started just working on how do people learn? How do we break that down into, different stages where we can correct them before they develop bad habits.
Right.
And we can see the bad habits forming because we've chunked this down and broken it down. And we developed this multi-phase system that just had people learning at a ridiculous rate. And they were outpacing our instructors.
Wow.
Because we suddenly realized, like, we might have done this too well. And so then we had to develop, okay, well, how do we actually test? Are they retaining all this? So then we worked on with a couple of different biomechanists and, Dr. John Landry and a couple of psychologists and sports physiologists and everybody to develop a testing method of, how do we see if people are learning this skill? How do we actually test it? Then once we did that, I had all these lessons that had happened over time that I had seen teaching throughout the world, having my own teachers of, okay, here's all the ways that when you're dealing with a teacher and a student that the relationship either flourishes or it sours. And so I wrote a book about that.
Okay.
And so then we had a learning system and we had a martial arts system. And even though the two work together, the learning system is completely separate. It can just be taken away from the martial arts system and applied to any martial arts system, which is what schools around the world have been doing.
Cool. All right. So now let's get a little bit into, your book, because you transitioned into that. So now you have this learning system. Did you find that martial arts, by the way, I think is an amazing sport. My daughter is a black belt in Taekwondo, and
nice.
I've had my fair share of my experiences with martial arts, and I think it's very interesting because you could take that philosophy of martial arts and kind of bring that into your real life, whether it's in business or relationships, and it's just kind of this dance and this movement that's I find pretty exciting. Now, how did you make the connection into the book? Was that from the system?
Well, I was driving to I've had a lot of success over time with all of this. And so, it's not like I have done the starving artist thing where, I'm living in California on my brother's couch,
right.
Trying to teach martial art for a living. And then all of a sudden one day you end up in your car with your dog. But, over the years, I've found a lot of success. And I was driving to the beach house in Florida, and I suddenly, my mom, who, she's getting up there in age, even though she runs about 5 miles a day. She's an incredible woman.
That's awesome.
And she said, when you get to her age, sometimes a lot of people wake up and they go, is this all there is? And, I'm just waking up every day waiting to die.
Right.
And I was driving down the road and I thought, is this all there is? Like, I'm just teaching people new ways to hurt each other. And, even though I had helped people with their movement and, their ability to survive under stress and duress, everywhere from, military units, and everybody says, military, but military units down to soccer moms and police departments, I just didn't feel like it was enough. And so I got down and I sat down on the deck and I said, okay, if I was going to write a book to help other people, what would the book be? And next thing I knew, I was there for, I was there for like a week, and all of a sudden I was 20 pages into 4 different books.
Wow.
So I was writing on one book one night and I'm 20 pages in, and one book one night, I'm 20 pages in. And I came down to the end of it and I had a friend of mine named Barry, and Barry and I were childhood friends, and he ended up getting a really rare form of cancer, and he passed away. But before he passed, we spent a lot of time on the phone, talking about his cancer, and, he only had like 2 weeks to live and a week to live. And then all of a sudden, we're talking for hours at night, but he's passing out for 30 minutes out of that hour from the drugs, and then he's waking back up and we're talking.
Wow.
And he was always telling me, like, I feel like you could do more with this. Like, I feel like if he was a business owner, he was a small business owner. I feel like if you took some of these principles, maybe you could do something for people in business. And I started looking at it, and I had all these books laid out, and something kept drawing me to the idea that you can have the best process in the world for achieving goals, but if you have the wrong goals, then all you're going to end up doing is looking back and going, well, what did I do? Like, nobody ever taught me how to get the right goals.
Right.
And it really kind of started when I was thinking about new college graduates and writing a book about, what do they need to do in the first 5 years in the workforce? And it was like, oh man, I had read all the different self-help books, all the personal growth books, looked at all the teachers, and every one of them was giving a great process. Very few of them were saying, hey, you might not have the right goals here, so you might be taking my process in a direction that doesn't help you. And that's kind of where I started to make that transition, because we had realized through martial art, under the most stressful situations that a human can endure, how to make people capable of choosing the right goal to survive.
Right.
And so it wasn't a big jump to bring it over to a place where people weren't getting stabbed and shot.
Right.
So,
Great.
we could teach that process.
So it's interesting. People often set goals based on their life experiences, whether those are good or bad. And so I think that's where the wrong set of goals perhaps comes in, because we're kind of pre-framed from a young age from our mothers, fathers, teachers, and preachers as to what the right goals should be, whether it's, a certain career or a certain life path or what have you, right? So if you're on that path, how do you, and I think your book kind of gets into this a little bit, how do you shift? How do you change? At what point do you realize I'm on the wrong path, I have the wrong goals, I need to shift or change this?
Well, I think the first question people have to ask themselves is that, are they making their goals? Everybody says, goals are supposed to be for the future, but very rarely do people go to the end of the line and look at, who is that person in the future? Okay, I've said this year I'm going to lose 10 pounds and I'm going to run a 5K, but I didn't ask the question of why is that important to the person I'm going to be in 1 year. All I've done is I've set some arbitrary goals, but I never said, okay, this is the person that's going to result out of these goals. And so I think the first thing that people have to do is they have to ask themselves, am I working from a basis of the past, and this is what I want to be today, or the person that I have been would want these goals, or is this the goals that the person I want to be in the future would want to be successful? And I think once you kind of answer those kind of deep questions that most people don't want to dig that deep into, it's much easier to say, well, I'm just going to do these things, instead of saying, here's the why of why I'm going to do them. Then we really have to look at, the reasons why we fail. And we're not looking at the what we fail at, we're looking at the why of what we're failing at. Because those tend to set up our ability to achieve goals. And so you can want to do everything in the world to get in shape, but if there's certain things in your life that are creating a theme of being unhealthy, then you're never going to get there, because your brain doesn't work that way. The habits and neurology, they are going to fight you every step of the way, because the brain likes to make assumptions and be comfortable in its current existence. It doesn't want to be pushed too hard. Well, so if you're not answering those failure themes, then you're not going to be able to achieve everything that you want. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize. I think the brain always wants to make you right. So whatever your thoughts are, it's going to make that right for you. And I think a lot of people fall into that trap. They get so involved in their story, and they really own that story, whether it serves them or doesn't serve them. And so I think that's where you have to undo the past. So I think that you can, what I like to do is say, what kind of legacy do I want to leave for my children, for my family, for future generations? And I start from there. Sometimes when I'm doing my goal settings, what do I want my life to look like when I get to a certain place, or level? And then what actions, attitudes, and behaviors do I need to implement to get there? And is what I'm doing now serving me or not serving me? So what do I need to change? What kind of belief systems do I need to get rid of? And I think that's where you go into undo the past and plan your future.
Well, if you even on a scientific level, there was a study that was done, and people always say there was a study, but anybody that wants to, these studies, contact me. I'll give you the links to them. That they were trying to figure out what happens when you shoot a photon into a microwave, and what it's going to look like when it comes out of the microwave. And they were trying to predict it from the beginning. So they said, okay, when it comes out of this microwave, it's going to do this. And they found that when they predicted from the beginning, they had a 50-50 chance of, this is what it's going to be. If they looked at it from its end state, then they had a 90% chance of saying what happened. Mm-hmm. And so they started working backwards. And I think the key for most people is to start working backwards from, like you were saying, the legacy that you want to leave. This is the person I'm going to be when I'm 70. So how am I going to work backwards? And if I know these are the things that I have to line up in order to do them, then I just set myself up to get there. And I set up a process instead of working within, this gigantic vacuum. Because when you're working with this vacuum where you have, goals that are very short term or medium term, then you don't have that long term thing that okay, I'm going to get here because I'm getting even further out. Mm-hmm. Everything just kind of starts working against you in that vacuum because the vacuum very quickly fills up with day-to-day things. So you kind of just leave everything behind. Mm-hmm. When we look at undoing the past, we have to recognize that to do that and to truly become successful for most people, I mean, some people can just random their way through life and get lucky. I know a guy like that. He just attracts money, mm-hmm. And anything that he does, he's going to attract money, but he's the rare exception. To really undo the past so you can take hold of the future. You have to look at your life and go, okay, up until now, I have been living this way and I've gotten this far, but I've developed all these bad habits. Right. I had these failure themes in my life. I have these wrong goals that I've been setting. I haven't looked at where I need to be in the future. I haven't really undone the past and kind of addressed all those different things that are affecting me every day, all the way down to my little defensive mechanisms, or, the fact that I get up at 9 when I could get up at 7 and get more done, but I complain that I can't get enough done during the day, not recognizing that I've been going to sleep late for the past 3 years. Right. So, it's adjusting those things that we do in the book, and we give because the book, you have the book, but then you have a 40-page workbook that you have to work through.
I saw that.
And that workbook, it's brutal because it really makes you it makes you put it on paper. Yeah. And once you start putting it on paper, you can really track it. It's not, I'm going to list out a couple of goals. It's a beautiful mind writing it all out, reeling, and then page to page, seeing how what you're writing out is refining, and then how the process is forcing you to pick the right goals based on attainability. There's no reason to set a goal if you can't attain it, mm-hmm. because psychologically you're going to feel so defeated, you're not going to want to achieve other goals. Right. So you have to have a goal that's attainable. Then you have to, make sure that, you can start to measure it. And everybody talks about, SMART and things like that. But, if you really look at, does this goal help me to who I want to be in the long term? And do I have the means, needs, and wants to be able to get it? You're halfway to changing your life.
Yeah. And the other great question is, and what happens if I don't reach it? How am I going to feel then? So that's how you can gauge how important it is to you. If you don't achieve it and you're okay with it, then that's probably not a great goal to have to begin with, right?
Yeah, it wasn't that big of a goal.
Right, exactly. So tell me, in your experience, what do you feel is the number one limiting belief that you encounter in your path or the people you work with?
We call it SBR.
Okay.
Stop being right.
Okay.
That is the number, and it's funny that you were talking about earlier that the brain wants to be right. That stop being right is probably the most people feeling the entitlement to be right, or if they get down to how their brain actually determines that they're right, they very quickly realize that you do not actually live an exist. You're not being day to day. You're just kind of existing.
Right.
You're floating through based off of a series of events that have happened to you since you were born.
Mm-hmm.
And your brain is every night, the way the process works is you live all day and then you go to bed, and then your brain processes through the hippocampus everything that happens, and it starts to catalog everything.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you didn't do this process, you would constantly touch hot stoves.
Right.
And so your brain, based on the way that we've evolved, constantly your conscious brain talks to the unconscious brain and says, hey, I'm faced with this situation. What's about to happen? Have we dealt with this before? And then the unconscious brain says, yes, we have, because I cataloged it when you were 8 years old and you met a man that has a beard and he has a certain smell.
Mm-hmm.
This is what happened. And so you have a new boss that has a beard and a certain smell, and the first thing that you do is you allow your 8-year-old self to make your 35-year-old self body posture and get defensive.
Right.
Because that's the way that your brain is designed so that the saber-toothed tiger doesn't kill you in the jungle.
Exactly.
Our brain hasn't caught up with the way that today works because we have needs outside of, subsistence farming and hunting, but we still have a brain that's stuck in there. And so when people suddenly realize, if you really stop being right for a second, if you truly look at you're here and they're there, or you're there, and you go, okay, I'm here, this is my there, but then you switch over and you look back at yourself from where they're at, and you stop being right, communication completely opens up. Every communication you have, it can build you to get to the person that you want to be in the future. Every situation that you're confronted with, you see it as a building block to get you somewhere instead of an obstacle that you have to overcome, because the last time you dealt with somebody like this, you might not even remember it, but the brain does. So that's why we tell people stop being right. Just make a habit of everything that you deal with. Think about it in terms of the future and look at it in terms of the person that you decide that you want to be in the future, and look at it in those terms, not look at it the way that you want to see it today.
Right.
And that's if we can get people to stop being right and actually communicate,
Right.
To form consensus, to listen to the other person, find the things that you agree on, and then use the things that you agree on to start talking about the things that you disagree on, we could completely change the way that people interact. We could, you can change the way you feel internally. You no longer feel like you're always being attacked, or the world is against you, or that you have to be defensive. You start to see the world as a solvable problem instead of, an obstacle that can't be overcome. And you start to change your mindset a little bit. So stop being right is the biggest thing that anybody can do day to day.
I totally agree. And I think that's huge in changing your thought patterns. Your thoughts create things and opportunities or obstacles because your thoughts are so powerful. And so if you really want to change your life, you really need to change your thought process and, change your actions and attitudes and behaviors so that you can actually manifest the life that you wish.
Exactly.
It's that simple. But I agree. Changing the way that you think and you process things, always having to be right. I tell my patients all the time, if you think you're going to get better, you will. And if you think you're not going to get better, you're not, because your brain always wants to make you right. So choose what it is that you truly want and stop battling inside, your head, right? Who's going to win? You choose, you decide.
Well, the future is, the past is certain. And I wrote a free ebook. I hate to plug, but it has some of these things over at our website that, the future is so uncertain, but the past, it's there. It's touchable. It's feelable. Your friends can reinforce it when you have a bad day, and you can go out and you can talk about the bad old times. And you can latch onto that for that comfort. The future, getting people to actually be future focused is a difficult thing to do because the brain and our habits are so wired into the past. But even if people make that 5% adjustment of 5% of the day when I'm dealing with my spouse, or I'm dealing with my kids, or my boss, or the person at McDonald's, don't go to McDonald's.
I was going to say, Matt, come on.
You know, don't go to McDonald's. But you know, when you're doing that, if you can make that 5% adjustment in your interactions every day, you can't help but get to 10, 15, 20, 50, because you're going to see such a change. You're going to want to repeat that change, and because everything's going to change for you, because people are going to deal with you differently.
Absolutely. I completely agree. We have a book in the office that it's based on nutrition. It's called 1 Degree of Change, and just 1 degree every single day, just one little thought, one little process, one little step every single day at the end of 30 days. I mean, the changes are incredible.
There's a story that I tell in Undo about this boss that I had, and he was a mentor. I worked side by side with him. He was self-made multimillionaire, you know, all these shops that he owned, all this different stuff. And he used to tell the story that he was flying to Hawaii, and he went up to the cockpit pre 9/11, and he was talking to him about the autopilot. And they said, well, we're only here to just adjust it and keep it on course. You know, every now and then we give it a little bit of a nudge, because the difference over 4,000 miles is, you know, the difference between Hawaii and Siberia. Now, later on, a friend of mine that's a pilot told me it's not exactly true, but the principle is kind of true. That, you know, when I wrote Undo and built the workbook, and then it culminates in this thing that basically, if you do it, you can't help but succeed, because it's a process based off of, you know, the way that your brain works. Is all you have to do is have that little nudge. If you just nudge it every now and then, that 1 degree that you were talking about, that 1%, you're going to stay on and just make a complete, you know, alteration in your life, versus letting life just take you off 1 degree. Because next thing you know, if you do 1 degree off of what your plan was, at the end of the year, you're at 365 degrees, and you've just gone in one big circle and haven't gone anywhere.
Yeah.
If you can just adjust it, you can stay on that path instead of going like this.
Right. Exactly. I totally agree. Matt, your book, Undo, How to Undo the Past and Plan Your Ideal Future. Where can they pick that up?
You can get it over at the website. So it's pastless.net,
Okay.
PASTLESS.net. Or you can go over to Amazon and type in Undo Matt Powell, and it'll pop up there. It's got great reviews. You can get it in Kindle or, you know, ebook form, or you can get it in hard copy. So any way that you want to get it, and it comes with the workbook. So, you know, you can do the Kindle copy. You get the workbook. It has a link in there in the back of the book, so you can go to our website to a certain link and then print off other copies of the workbook so you can work through it. Hard copy is the same thing.
Okay.
So, but I hope people enjoy it, and if they have any questions or anything like that about the book, you can always, you know, contact me at, you know, my email or Instagram or whatever.
Right. Absolutely. So pastless.net. And then if they're interested in your system, Pramek, Pramek.
.com.
Okay,
Yep.
.com. There you go. So you might have some martial artists that want to contact you and take their game to the next level. So, so thank you, Matt, for being on the show with me, and
Thank you
for giving great information to the audience, and hopefully shifting their thought patterns into a better direction, so they can actually manifest their epic life.
No, I really appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. I hope everybody goes by the site. You can get a free ebook over there as well. But, you know, it's shows like this that I get so excited about, to be able to go out and talk to people. You know, it's so much more interactive than just sitting there on YouTube or something like that and talking. So I really appreciate you having me on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. Well, folks, here you have it. You can undo the past and create your ideal future. All you have to do is change your thought process, and I urge you to go to pastless.net and make sure you pick up your copy of Undo, because you can actually create the future that you want. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening. This is Manifest Your Epic Life with Dr. Aixa Goodrich.
Need more?
Visit manifestyourepiclife.com for blog posts, previous episodes, podcasts, and more. Now, go have an epic day.